Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones were two people who seemed almost destined to find each other. When the world looked at Michael in the late 1970 seconds and 1980 seconds, they saw him as a gifted performer with rare talent. But Quincy saw something deeper, a young man who not only wanted to entertain but also wanted to create art that could last for generations. Their connection was not something that happened overnight. It began slowly, like a spark that eventually grew into one of the most powerful creative partnerships the music world had ever seen. In the late 1970 seconds, Michael was stepping out of his childhood image. He had already been a star with the Jackson 5. But he wanted to become something more, an independent artist with his own voice and direction. He wanted music that matched who he was becoming. Quincy Jones, already a respected producer, arranger, and musician with decades of experience, understood the moment Michael was in. He recognized that Michael was ready to move from a talented young singer to a full-fledged global superstar. When they first agreed to work together on the album Off the Wall, neither of them knew how big the journey would become, but there was a shared excitement in the air. Their work on Off the Wall was smooth, natural, and filled with energy. Michael brought fresh ideas, incredible vocals, and a hunger to grow. Quincy brought wisdom, creativity, and a calm confidence that guided the sessions. They were different people with different personalities, but their differences blended in a beautiful way. Michael was soft-spoken and deeply focused, while Quincy was outgoing, expressive, and full of musical knowledge. Instead of clashing, these traits balanced perfectly. When the album was released in 1979, it became a major success. Fans felt something new from Michael, and critics praised the maturity of the music. For Quincy and Michael, this success felt like the beginning of something even bigger. That something arrived in 1982 when they created Thriller. The world had never seen an album like Thriller, and even Quincy and Michael could not have predicted how far it would go. During the making of the album, their teamwork reached a level that felt almost magical. Quincy helped push Michael beyond his comfort zone, while Michael challenged Quincy with bold ideas and strong instincts. They trusted each other completely. If Quincy suggested a change, Michael listened. If Michael felt strongly about an idea, Quincy encouraged him to explore it. Every song they worked on felt like a chance to break new ground. The release of Thriller changed the entire music industry. Michael became the most famous entertainer on the planet, and Quincy's name was spoken with great respect by musicians everywhere. Together, they created a body of work that not only broke sales records, but also shaped pop culture in a lasting way. Their songs were on radios around the world, their music videos played constantly on television, and people of all ages connected with the album. It was a special time for them. They were proud of what they had built together, and their friendship grew even stronger. After Thriller came the next challenge: how to follow something that had already made history. Many people wondered whether they could ever match that success again. But Michael and Quincy were not afraid. Instead of feeling pressure, they focused on the music. For them, making something beautiful mattered more than trying to chase numbers. When they began work on Michael's next album, Bad, both men wanted to show growth. Michael was now more confident as a songwriter and producer, and Quincy supported his desire for more artistic control. During the Bad sessions, their partnership continued to shine. They talked openly, experimented with new sounds, and encouraged each other to try ideas that felt fresh and different. Michael brought songs he had written from personal experiences and dreams about the future. Quincy helped shape the arrangements, guide the musicians, and make sure every detail felt right. The sessions were long, often stretching late into the night, but neither of them complained. They loved the work, and they loved pushing themselves to create something meaningful. When Bad was released in 1987, it once again proved that the two men were in a creative league of their own. The album produced many hit singles, and Michael's world tour that followed became one of the biggest tours of the 1980 seconds. Their success seemed unstoppable. People around the world saw the results, the music videos, the performances, the record-breaking sales. But behind all the success was something even more important: a bond built on trust, respect, and shared passion for music. By the time the bad era ended in 1989, Michael and Quincy had spent nearly a decade working closely together. They had produced 3 albums that became milestones in modern music. More than that, they had built a friendship full of admiration. Michael often spoke about how Quincy had helped him grow as an artist. Quincy, in turn, admired Michael's dedication, discipline, and natural brilliance. Even though they came from different generations and different backgrounds, they understood each other deeply through their work. As the 1,990 seconds approached, many fans believed Michael and Quincy would continue working together forever. After all, their results were extraordinary. They had created songs that touched millions of people, they had broken barriers in entertainment, and they had shown the world what could happen when 2 great talents joined forces with a common purpose. Their partnership felt legendary, and people expected their next album to be another landmark moment in music. What made their collaboration so special was not just talent, it was the harmony of their strengths. Michael had a unique ability to feel music emotionally. He could sense what a song needed, even before the band played it. Quincy had a rare ability to understand any artist he worked with. He knew how to bring out the best in people, and he knew when to step back and let the artist shine. Together, they made choices that felt bold but also right. They took risks, trusted each other's ideas, and created a body of work that felt alive and full of emotion. Even as fame grew around Michael and Quincy, their working relationship stayed grounded in mutual respect. Behind closed doors, they were simply 2 people trying to make something beautiful. They discussed melodies, shared stories, played with new sounds, and always aimed for excellence. Their laughter in the studio, their long talks about goals, and their quiet moments of understanding created a deep connection that could be felt in every project. Looking back at those years, the world sees them as a golden era. The albums they created together changed music forever. They raised standards, opened doors for new artists, and created memories that people still carry today. Fans often say that there was something magical about the combination of Michael's voice and Quincy's production. It felt almost like the universe brought them together for a special purpose, and in many ways, their partnership truly was a gift to the world. As the 1,990 seconds approached, both men stood at a turning point without fully realizing it. Their journey had been remarkable, filled with success that few people ever experience. And yet, even in those bright moments, the seeds of change were quietly forming. But for now, in the final days of their golden era, the world saw them as unstoppable, a pair whose creativity lit up the music world and whose connection shaped some of the most unforgettable songs ever recorded. As the 1,980 seconds slowly turned toward the 1,990 seconds, Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones were standing at the top of the music world. Their partnership had produced some of the biggest albums in history, and to many people, they looked unstoppable. But behind the scenes, both men were experiencing quiet changes within themselves. These changes weren't sudden or dramatic, they were slow, gentle shifts that often happen when creative people grow, explore new ideas, and prepare for new chapters. Michael had always been a person who wanted to evolve. Even when he reached the highest level of fame, he continued to study music, watch new artists, learn new sounds, and think about where he wanted to go next. After finishing the Bad Tour in 1989, he felt a strong desire to shape his own musical path with more independence. He loved Quincy, respected him deeply, and valued everything they had built together. But he also felt, inside his heart, that he needed to take more control over his future creative direction. At the same time, Quincy Jones was also changing. Quincy had already lived many artistic lives: composer, producer, musician, arranger, and he had worked with countless artists. The late 1,980 seconds and early 1,990 seconds brought him new opportunities outside of producing albums. He was expanding into film projects, television work, and large creative ventures that required more of his time and energy. His schedule became fuller, and his interests grew wider. He still cared deeply for Michael and admired his talent. But he began to feel the weight of how much the partnership demanded from both of them. These personal changes did not mean anything negative about their friendship. They simply reflected the natural progression of two artists who had accomplished so much together and now felt the pull of new directions. However, when two people begin to evolve at different speeds, even quietly, the gap between them can slowly widen without either of them noticing at first. As Michael started planning his next album, which would eventually become Dangerous, he envisioned a project that sounded different from anything he had done before. The world of music was changing. New styles like New Jack Swing, modern pop, fresh beat patterns, and innovative production techniques were rising. Michael was drawn to this new sound, a sound that felt energetic, youthful, and bold. He loved experimenting, and he wanted an album that captured the spirit of a new decade. Quincy, on the other hand, had his own musical preferences shaped by decades of experience. His style leaned toward classic arrangements, warm harmonies, and a timeless feel. While he always supported innovation, his musical foundation was built on traditions that had defined much of his life. Michael's new ideas, though exciting, did not fully align with Quincy's creative instincts. Neither of them argued about this. In fact, they rarely had disagreements. But when they discussed the next project, their visions simply didn't match the way they used to. Michael wanted something sharp, modern, and edgy. Quincy preferred a more traditional approach that focused on musical richness and balance. These differences weren't harsh, they were artistic differences, the kind that appear when two creative minds look at the same future from opposite angles. Music executives also played a part, though indirectly. Michael was now one of the biggest stars on the planet, and record labels hoped his next album would reshape the 1,990 seconds, the way Thriller had shaped the 1,980 seconds. Michael felt that pressure. He knew people expected greatness from him every time. But instead of becoming stressed, he felt even more determined to guide his own ideas. He wanted to create a sound that truly reflected who he was becoming as an artist. Meanwhile, Quincy was receiving more responsibilities and new creative opportunities outside of music production. He was admired worldwide for his work, and people wanted him for projects that used his knowledge in film, broadcasting, and large-scale artistic leadership. With his growing commitments, he knew he could not give the same level of time and focus that he had dedicated to the previous 3 Michael Jackson albums. He still loved working with Michael, but he was honest with himself about the direction his life was taking. As the months passed, these differences in goals became more noticeable, even if no one spoke about them directly. Michael found himself imagining sessions with new producers. He listened to fresh sounds that younger producers were creating, and he felt excited by the possibilities. At the same time, Quincy began reflecting on the past decade with Michael, the joy, the hard work, the friendship, and the incredible results. He was proud of what they had built, and he knew it was rare to experience that kind of creative magic. Even though they both sensed change, there was no anger between them. In fact, there was deep affection. They admired each other greatly. But admiration cannot erase artistic differences. Michael wanted to explore new territory. Quincy, although supportive, knew that his musical approach no longer fit perfectly with the new direction Michael wanted to take. When they finally had conversations about the future, they were calm and respectful. Neither one blamed the other. They simply talked about where they were in life. Quincy understood Michael's desire to take more control. Michael understood Quincy's desire to pursue new ventures. Their friendship remained intact, but their working dynamic was shifting in a natural way. Some people around them noticed the changes. They saw Michael spending more time listening to newer producers. They saw Quincy getting busy with large creative projects outside the recording studio, but no one thought negatively of it. People admired them for being honest with themselves and for honoring their own growth. Still, fans did not know any of this at the time. From the outside, it seemed like everything was the same as always. Most people assumed Quincy would produce the next Michael Jackson album, just like he had produced the previous 3. Many believed the partnership was simply too powerful to stop. After all, how could two people who had created Thriller ever go separate ways in the studio? But life often moves in gentle, unexpected ways. What feels permanent in one season may change naturally in the next. Michael and Quincy were not breaking apart. They were simply following their creative paths, and those paths, for the first time in more than a decade, were pointing in different directions. The early discussions about the Dangerous project highlighted their new differences. Quincy was loving his new commitments, while Michael was loving the idea of creating something completely fresh. Their conversations were polite, even warm, but the message became clear. They were no longer looking at the same musical future. Michael stayed respectful throughout the process. He never demanded anything or made the decision seem harsh. He simply felt that it was time for him to grow in a new way. Quincy respected that. He had seen many artists evolve, and he understood that growth sometimes required stepping into independence. Quincy, too, felt a mixture of emotions. He was proud of Michael, proud of the man he had become, proud of the artist he had shaped, but he also felt a quiet sadness knowing that their journey, at least as a producer-artist team, was reaching a natural pause. Still, he kept that sadness mostly to himself, not wanting to place any emotional weight on Michael. Creative relationships are sensitive. They depend on trust, balance, and shared goals. For more than 10 years, Michael and Quincy had shared the same musical dreams, but by 1990, their dreams were changing, and because they cared about each other, they allowed those changes to happen without trying to force things back to how they once were. As the year 1990 arrived, the unspoken truth finally settled between them. The chapter of their musical partnership, the one that produced some of the most legendary albums of all time, was gently coming to an end. Not with arguments, not with anger, but with acceptance, respect, and quiet understanding. This moment, though calm on the surface, marked the beginning of a new era. For Michael, the Dangerous album would become a turning point. For Quincy, new horizons awaited, and although they didn't yet realize it fully, this shift would shape their relationship in the years to come, leading to reflections, distance, and eventually, an apology that carried deep meaning later in life. When Michael Jackson finally began moving forward with the creation of the Dangerous album, the shift in his partnership with Quincy Jones became real. Even though their conversations had been gentle and respectful, the official decision still carried weight. For almost 12 years, Quincy had been the guiding musical force behind Michael's biggest albums. He had shaped the sound that made Michael a global icon. And Michael had become like family to him, so even if the change was peaceful, it was still emotional. Michael approached the new project with excitement. He wanted fresh energy and new musical ideas. He began exploring producers who were creating sounds that felt modern and bold. Among them was Teddy Riley, a young producer known for the new jack swing style. His music was tight, rhythmic, and full of life. Exactly the kind of energy Michael wanted for the 1,990 seconds. When Michael heard some of Teddy's work, he immediately felt the spark. It was the same kind of spark he had felt years earlier when he met Quincy. This didn't mean that one bond replaced the other. It simply meant Michael was entering a new artistic phase. Quincy watched this new direction with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was happy for Michael. He knew that every artist needed to reinvent themselves from time to time. Quincy had done that many times throughout his own career. But on the other hand, he felt a quiet sadness. After so many years of working side by side, he was no longer at the center of Michael's creative world. He tried not to let it bother him, but such emotions are natural, especially in a relationship built on trust, admiration, and shared triumphs. People in the music industry began whispering about the change. Some were surprised, some were confused, and some wondered if a disagreement had happened behind the scenes. But nothing dramatic had taken place. There was no argument, no conflict, no harsh words. It was simply a moment where both artists needed different things. Still, rumors are common in the entertainment world, and soon the media began to create dramatic stories about the split. Michael, who valued privacy, chose not to respond publicly. Quincy also remained graceful, never speaking negatively, but the rumors did affect the emotions around the situation. During the early months of the dangerous recording process, Michael was deeply focused. He spent long hours in the studio, experimenting with sounds, rhythms, and melodies. He was excited to work with younger producers who brought new methods and ideas. They admired him greatly, and he pushed them to bring their best work. Michael had an intense work ethic. He listened carefully, requested changes, refined every detail, and always aimed to create something special. Even without Quincy, his commitment to excellence remained strong. Meanwhile, Quincy was adjusting to this new chapter. He had many projects to focus on, but sometimes he found himself thinking about the sessions he once shared with Michael. The laughter, the brainstorming, the excitement of creating songs that would later become legendary. He missed the connection, even if he understood the reasoning behind the change. In interviews, he continued to praise Michael's talent and dedication, always speaking with kindness. His admiration didn't fade, but inside, he carried a quiet, emotional distance that he didn't often reveal publicly. The world outside had no idea how personal the moment was for both men. People only saw the surface. Michael Jackson creating a new album with new producers. Fans wondered why Quincy wasn't involved this time. Some assumed Quincy was too busy, while others assumed Michael wanted something new. A few speculated that the two had fallen out. But the real truth was far more gentle. It was simply two creative spirits following their own paths, while still caring deeply for each other. As the dangerous sessions continued, Michael created songs that felt different from anything he had done before. Tracks like Jam, Remember the Time, and Dangerous carried a new kind of rhythm, sharper, faster, more urban, more modern. This sound reflected the energy of the new decade. Michael wanted music that connected with young people, with dance culture, with the streets, with clubs, and with the changing world around him. Quincy, though proud of Michael's growth, knew these sounds were not part of his natural style. He understood that Michael had made the right choice for his artistic future. Even though Quincy wasn't involved in the production, he still cared about how Michael's album would turn out. He followed the progress from a respectful distance, cheering Michael on quietly. Even if only in his own heart, he knew that every artist needed the freedom to explore, and he wanted Michael to be happy and fulfilled. But at the same time, he sometimes wondered if Michael missed him at all during the process. Such thoughts weren't born from ego, they came from the emotional bond that forms when people create art together. Michael, too, felt the emotional shift. Even as he enjoyed working with new producers, he sometimes remembered the familiarity and comfort of working with Quincy. He respected Quincy deeply and appreciated everything he had learned from him. But Michael also knew that growth often required stepping into unfamiliar places, and the new musical world he was building brought him excitement and pride. The changes weren't easy for him emotionally, but they were necessary for his artistic evolution. The media, always eager for dramatic stories, began to portray the separation between Michael and Quincy as a dramatic breakup. Headlines suggested tension, disappointment, or disagreement. None of that was true, but once ideas spread in the press, they tend to grow quickly. Fans started asking questions, music insiders whispered theories, and although neither Michael nor Quincy wanted a dramatic narrative, the world slowly shaped one on its own. Michael tried not to pay attention to the noise. He stayed in the studio, focused and determined. He wanted Dangerous to be an album that defined a new era. He pushed himself creatively every day. He explored new vocal styles, new rhythms, and new songwriting techniques. He worked endlessly on dance routines and visual ideas. Michael saw the album as a whole new stage of his life. It was his chance to show the world that he could grow without losing his identity. Quincy, on the other hand, faced the emotional reality of stepping back. Even though he had many accomplishments outside of Michael's career, their partnership held a unique place in his life. He sometimes looked back on old sessions with warm memories. He remembered moments when they celebrated finishing a song, when they laughed over musical experiments, when they made decisions that later shaped music history. Letting go of that chapter wasn't easy. But Quincy handled it with maturity and pride in what they had created together. When Dangerous was finally released in 1991, it became a huge success. Fans loved the new sound, the new style, and the modern energy. Michael had proven that he could reinvent himself beautifully. Quincy congratulated him warmly, feeling proud even from afar. He knew that the success belonged to Michael, and that the younger producers had done incredible work. The world embraced the album, and Michael stepped confidently into the new decade. But even with the success, the emotional distance between Michael and Quincy quietly remained. It wasn't a wall, it was simply space created by change, growth, and unspoken feelings. The world only saw the results, not the delicate human emotions behind them. Years would pass before both men fully understood how much the split had affected them. And even more years would pass before Quincy openly spoke about some regrets and offered an apology that carried a lot of meaning. But for now, in the early 1990 seconds, the story was still unfolding, a story of change, growth, respect, and the quiet emotional ripples that come when two legendary creative partners step into new worlds on their own. After the release of Dangerous, Michael Jackson stepped into a new stage of his career. The album was modern, exciting, and filled with fresh energy. It showed the world that he could grow without repeating his past. His music videos became global events, his performances amazed millions, and his creativity continued to shine with the same brilliance people had always admired. But behind this success, there was something quiet and unseen happening between Michael and Quincy Jones. For the first time in more than a decade, they were moving through life on separate artistic paths. Michael became extremely busy after Dangerous. He invested his time into tours, short films, charities, and new creative projects. He traveled across countries, performed for huge audiences, and kept reaching for new artistic heights. His schedule was packed, and with so much happening around him, the distance between him and Quincy grew naturally. Michael wasn't avoiding Quincy, life was simply pushing him forward at a fast pace, leaving very few moments to reconnect with old partners. No matter how important they once were, Quincy, too, was living a very active life. He had stepped into new roles in film production, television, and large creative ventures. He produced award-winning projects, worked with many artists, and became a mentor for countless young talents. His life was full of new responsibilities, and he no longer spent long hours in music studios the way he once did with Michael. Even so, whenever he thought about their past, it brought him a quiet sense of pride. The albums they made together remained some of the greatest achievements of his career. Even though both men were busy, they were still aware of each other. Their connection never truly disappeared. Michael would sometimes hear things Quincy said in interviews, and Quincy would hear updates about Michael's new projects. They didn't speak often, but neither spoke negatively about the other. Instead, there was a deep, unspoken respect that remained steady, even throughout the years of silence. Quincy occasionally mentioned Michael in interviews, always praising his talent and dedication. But, at times, people could sense a touch of disappointment in Quincy's voice, like a small shadow hidden behind his warm words. It wasn't frustration with Michael. It was a reflection of the emotional gap that had formed since their split during the Dangerous era. Quincy had spent so many years by Michael's side, watching him grow and helping him shape some of the most influential music of all time. Losing that closeness, even for good reasons, was not easy. Michael, too, felt the history between them. Whenever he spoke about his past, he always acknowledged that Quincy had played an important role in his evolution. Michael rarely talked about the details of their separation, but he always honored Quincy's contributions. His comments were filled with gratitude, and his respect for Quincy never faded. Still, Michael was someone who kept his deepest emotions private. Even if he missed Quincy, he didn't speak about it openly. Fans and the media often wondered what really happened between them. As the years passed, theories grew. Some said they had disagreements, some said they simply drifted apart, and some said they could no longer agree on creative ideas. None of these stories truly reflected the softness and complexity of the situation. It wasn't a dramatic story. It was a human one. Two brilliant minds had worked together, achieved greatness, grown, and eventually taken separate paths. The world, however, liked dramatic stories, so the quiet truth stayed mostly hidden. During the 1,990 seconds, Michael continued exploring new sounds and new collaborations. Each album reflected a different side of his personality. He became more involved in production, more inventive, and more visually expressive. His career reached a level of global influence that very few people ever experience. But despite all of this, there were still moments of reflection for him, moments when he thought about how his journey had begun and who stood beside him during the most important steps of his rise. Quincy, from his side, watched Michael's career from a respectful distance. He remained proud, even protective at times, especially when he saw the pressures Michael faced. Quincy had always understood Michael in ways many people didn't. He had seen Michael's dedication, his sensitivity, his perfectionism, and his enormous heart. Quincy had spent years guiding and supporting Michael, and those memories stayed with him. Though the two weren't working together anymore, Quincy carried those experiences with warmth and affection. As the decade progressed, the distance between them became more noticeable. They appeared in different circles, worked on different types of projects, and rarely crossed paths. It wasn't intentional. It was simply the natural result of their busy lives. Many friendships experience this kind of drifting not because people stop caring, but because their journeys pull them in different directions. Despite the emotional distance, their bond remained alive in their music. Whenever one of their old songs played on the radio or at an event, people were reminded of the magic they created together. Even they themselves were reminded. Michael sometimes smiled when hearing old tracks, remembering the long studio nights and the creative excitement. Quincy sometimes shared stories about Michael with friends or interviewers, showing that the memories still lived in his heart. By the late 1,990 seconds, the music industry had changed again. Younger producers, new technologies, and new trends reshaped the landscape. Michael adapted beautifully, experimenting with digital sounds and modern styles. Quincy continued inspiring new generations, sharing his knowledge and wisdom. Even though they were traveling on different roads, their earlier work continued to influence the entire industry. Life kept moving forward. The years passed, but the quiet, emotional space between them never fully closed. They still cared about each other, even if they weren't in each other's lives the way they once were. Time, however, has a way of bringing new understanding. It softens feelings, clarifies memories, and reveals which connections truly matter. Around this time, Quincy began looking back on his life more deeply. He thought about the many projects he had done, the artists he had worked with, and the milestones he had achieved, and naturally, his thoughts often returned to Michael. He remembered Michael not just as an artist, but as a person with whom he had shared a special, once-in-a-lifetime connection. Quincy realized that some comments he had made in various interviews over the years might have been misunderstood or might have unintentionally hurt Michael. Quincy had never meant to cause hurt, but reflection sometimes brings awareness of things we didn't notice in the moment. Meanwhile, Michael continued living a life full of creativity and challenges. He kept pushing boundaries, kept working hard, and kept trying to give the world something meaningful. As he looked back on his early albums from time to time, he felt grateful for what Quincy had done for him. Their work together wasn't just about music, it was about growth, learning, and trust. Michael knew that without Quincy, his journey might have looked very different. The distance between them, though quiet and gentle, had lasted for years. Their lives had changed, their responsibilities had grown, and their creative paths had evolved in separate directions. Yet the affection and respect they held for each other never disappeared. Even though they weren't standing side by side in the studio anymore, the bond they formed during their golden era remained part of who they were. And then, after more than a decade of silence, something meaningful happened. Quincy reached a point where he felt the need to speak from the heart. He wanted to address the past not with blame, but with honesty and warmth. He wanted to acknowledge the emotional distance and offer something that carried great sincerity. This moment, which would arrive around 2001, would open a new chapter between the two legends, a chapter of reconnection, understanding, and healing. But they did not know it yet. For now, in the late 1990 seconds, the story was still unfolding quietly, filled with reflection, unspoken feelings, and the gentle pull of memories that never truly fade. By the time the year 2001 arrived, both Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones had lived through more than 10 years of separate creative journeys. They had each gone through changes, successes, challenges, and moments of reflection. Life had taken them in different directions, but their memories of the past continued to live quietly inside them. The world around them had changed too. Music had evolved, technology had grown, and the industry was no longer the same as it had been during their golden years together. Yet, one thing remained untouched: the impact they had made together and the deep emotional connection hidden beneath the surface. Quincy Jones, now an older and wiser man, had reached a place in his life where he reflected more softly on the moments that shaped him. As he revisited interviews, old conversations, and media coverage, he realized that some things he had said in the past, small comments, jokes, or unclear statements, might have been misunderstood. He had never intended to hurt Michael, but he began to wonder if some of his words had been taken the wrong way. Quincy was a person who valued honesty and kindness, and the thought that Michael might have felt hurt in any way rested heavily on his heart. On the other side, Michael was living a life filled with creativity but also with intense public attention. He was still recording, still dancing, still dreaming of new ideas, and still trying to give something meaningful to the world. Yet, like anyone who grows older, he often thought about the people who had shaped his early years. Quincy was one of those people. Michael never forgot how Quincy had guided him, encouraged him, and helped him discover new parts of himself as an artist. The memories of their long nights in the studio, their shared laughter, and their deep creative trust stayed warm in Michael's mind. Even with their respect for each other, life had created a quiet distance between them. Sometimes life works this way. People who once shared everything begin to live in separate worlds, not because of anger but simply because time moves forward. But despite the years that had passed, there was still something unfinished between them, something that needed to be said from the heart. In 2001, a moment arrived where Quincy felt strongly that he needed to reach out. He had been thinking about Michael often, thinking about their past, thinking about how much Michael meant to him as both an artist and a human being. He remembered their early days, when Michael was young and full of ambition. He remembered guiding Michael through vocal sessions, supporting him through doubts, and celebrating their victories together. Quincy knew that those memories shaped the best years of both their careers. One day, during a conversation, Quincy openly expressed his feelings. He acknowledged that he may have said things in past interviews that could have been misunderstood. He apologized sincerely, with genuine emotion, wanting Michael to know he had never meant to cause pain. It was not an apology for a single event, but for any small misunderstanding that might have built up over time. Quincy's words were simple, honest, and filled with warmth. For Michael, hearing this meant a great deal. He had never held anger in his heart toward Quincy, but the apology touched him deeply. It reminded him of the sincerity that had always been part of Quincy's character. Michael appreciated that Quincy took the time to reflect and reach out. It showed that their bond had not weakened. It had only been resting, waiting for the right moment to breathe again. Their conversation opened a gentle door between them. It wasn't an emotional explosion or a dramatic reunion. It was soft, peaceful, and full of respect. Two people who had walked through history together were finally reconnecting in a way that felt pure and meaningful. Both of them understood that time had changed their lives, but it had not erased the affection built during the years they had created music side by side. This moment of healing reminded Michael once again of why Quincy had been so important in his journey. Quincy had not only helped produce some of his biggest albums, but he had also offered guidance, wisdom, and emotional support during some of the most challenging moments of Michael's early adulthood. Quincy believed in him when the world was still trying to understand who Michael truly was. Quincy saw his potential long before the rest of the world caught on. And Michael, even in the busiest years of his life, never forgot that. Quincy, too, felt a sense of peace after speaking with Michael. He knew that honesty was the best way to honor a friendship that had helped shape modern music. He had always respected Michael's talent, drive, and kindness. And now, being able to express his feelings openly made him feel lighter, as if an invisible weight had finally lifted from his heart. The reconnection between them did not mean they would reunite professionally. Their lives were still very different, and they had chosen separate creative paths. But emotional healing does not need professional reunions. Sometimes, all someone needs is understanding, closure, and the simple warmth of knowing that a meaningful bond is still appreciated. After this moment, whenever Quincy spoke about Michael in interviews, his words carried a soft, affectionate tone. There was no hidden sadness anymore, only gratitude. He talked about Michael's brilliance, his dedication, and the joy it brought him to witness Michael's growth. Quincy made it clear to the world that he held Michael in the highest respect. Michael also spoke kindly of Quincy whenever asked about their past. He shared warm memories of their early days, often smiling or laughing as he recalled funny moments from their long hours in the studio. It was clear that the weight of their past had turned into something gentle and comforting for him as well. Their story became an example of how relationships can change through time but still remain meaningful. People grow, change, and sometimes drift apart, but that does not erase the beauty of what they once shared. Michael and Quincy showed the world that respect can survive distance, that appreciation can last across decades, and that healing can arrive even after years of silence. As time moved on, their partnership continued to live through the music they had created together. Songs like Billie Jean, Human Nature, Rock With You, and The Way You Make Me Feel remained timeless, and new generations continued to discover them. Every time someone listened to those songs, they connected with the magic that Michael and Quincy had created. Their work became a bridge across time, reminding people that creativity built on trust can last forever. The apology Quincy offered was not just a simple message, it was a final gesture of love, respect, and gratitude toward a friend he deeply valued. Michael accepted it with the same kindness that had always been a part of his nature. Their story came full circle, not with dramatic headlines but with quiet healing. In the end, the legacy of Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones was not only about record-breaking albums or global fame, it was also about two hearts that understood each other, two minds that created together, and two souls that reconnected with honesty and grace. Their journey reminded the world that even great partnerships go through seasons, and sometimes, the most meaningful part of a story is not the beginning or the success, it is the moment of healing that brings peace after years of unspoken feelings.